I'd like to welcome you to the 11th Annual Energy Forum for Turkey. This has been going on, as I say, for 11 years now, and EE events have been instrumental of communicating all the current issues relating to Turkey across many platforms. So we do our best to get the leading specialists with the knowledge and experience to give the best information and insights into current issues that face the Turkish economy and the future direction in which Turkey is going. And today we're focusing on energy, which is critical for Turkey at this moment in time. And we're going to get the panelists' views through the day as to how Turkey can manage their energy strategy going forward. We're going to be looking at a number of areas in terms of funding, finance, how the energy sector will be developed as we go forward. We'll be looking at renewables. We'll be looking at carbon neutral, how long that's going to take and what effect it will have on the industry. So it's going to be a very interesting day. We had a wonderful day yesterday. The numbers were overwhelming, over 2,000 I think that participated, and we're looking for the same sort of numbers today. So I'm not going to say much more apart from, we've got a wonderful panel that's coming on stream shortly. That will be monitored by Onur Bey, who's the Director of Energy at Istanbul at Portföy. So I'm going to drop out now and leave you to the people that know what they're talking about, which is a bit more than me, and let them share their views and insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Değer Bey?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and also welcome to our distinguished panelists to discuss today the distributed energy generation, notably the rooftop solar PV systems and their role for the transformation of Turkey's energy sector. I'm Değer Saygın, the director of Shura Energy Transition Center. We have today 4 very valuable and important sector players, experts in their field, representing the private sector, especially the technology investment side, business development side, the financing side, but also the sector associations working in this field of distributed energy generation. Maybe a few remarks on the role of distributed generation for Turkey. Many of the international, especially European and regional sector experts have heard about the very promising news on the renewable energy capacity deployment in Turkey over the course of the year 2020. Despite the COVID period's hurdles, it was a very important year for Turkey's renewable energy sector. And we expect that the distributed generation and solar PV will play a more important role there in the coming years. A recent study by Shura shows there is at least 15,000 megawatts of rooftop solar PV potential on the 9 million rooftops of Turkey. So that's a huge potential. We are approaching 7 gigawatts on overall for solar PV today. So there is much more to go given our country's huge resource availability. Our panelists today are Mr. Mustafa Dağdal. He's already here. He's the leader on distributed energy and e-mobility at the Enerjisa. Mr. Onur Mustafaoğlu, Director of Energy Investments from the Istanbul Portföy. Utku Korkmaz, founder of Solar Çatı, and Mr. Yusuf Bahadır Turan, who is also here with us today. He's the chairman of the board of the Solar 3 gigawatts, an important also initiative working on this field. So we will be discussing 5 main topics, and I'll stop with my introduction after I tell what these topics are. The market issues, policy issues, We'll be touching upon the PPAs, which is of course becoming more and more important in Turkey, which is a financing tool, but we'll also address their regulatory challenges. We'll be focusing on the innovation side, and finally the energy prosumers, which is becoming a new actor in Turkey when we talk about distributed generation. So I think we are complete with the exception of Mr. Utku Korkmaz. But all in all, I think we can start. We have exactly 40 minutes, so that means I should just stop talking and give the word to the panelists. And perhaps I actually wanted to start with the market and policy, but maybe let's start with the most burning issue on the financing. And I'll give the word to Mr. Mustafaoğlu. And I want to talk a bit about the design structure for bankable PPAs. So this is not my core area, so I had to write this question down to be able to ask it, write it to an expert. And so the question goes, how can off-taker and purchaser credibility issues be resolved to make long-term PPAs bankable for Turkey? And especially what I would like to learn in this discussion is what kind of risk management and collateral schemes can be designed for renewable energy PPAs in Turkey. So Mr. Mustafaoğlu, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saygın, and thank you for all the participants for participating to this session today. So actually, yeah, it's a very important phenomenon for the energy world in Turkey, the PPAs, as we are now running out of supporting schemes, and we'll be exposing to market price risking shortly. Actually, based on statistics, we can easily see that almost half of the projects which are participating to support the current support system this year will be out of that support system. The 50% will be out of this support scheme within the next 5 years. So there will be more megawatts in the market which are subject to market price. And in that respect, PPAs will play a crucial role to be able to keep that projects alive, keep the investor returns, and keep the electricity supply self-sustainable in that respect. So as the title of this discussion is distributed generation, I would like to answer this question from the unlicensed distributed generation perspective, because the PPAs are a large and extensive area to be discussed for energy world, and in particular for the renewable energy. But when it comes to distributed generation, we will be talking mostly about unlicensed projects. So the projects, the power plants, relatively smaller scale power plants located on the consumption spots. So from that respect, actually, the PPAs would have similar risks in general. But when it comes to distributed generation, they have some additional risks and additional critical points to be clarified, to be discussed, to be negotiated, to be agreed between the stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about, as you mentioned, off-taker, purchasers, lenders, producers, in some cases, the transmission line operators. And so from that respect, I would like to very quickly emphasize the main topics of a regular PPA. And then I would like to focus on very quickly the off-taker, the purchaser credibility risks and risk management, and how those can be mitigated. Actually, even though there is no straightforward answer for that, I'm sure I can elaborate a little more about potential solutions which we can all discuss. So first of all, the PPAs can be structured in two ways in general, which is one is the take or pay or take and pay structure. And for when we say distributed generation, after the recent changes in the regulation, we are mostly talking about solar PVs and little bit of wind projects, as we have now limit of 5 megawatts for distributed for unlicensed projects. So yeah, in the market, we mostly see in Europe, in Globe, and in most probably shortly in Turkey, we'll be seeing take and pay type of PPA structure. So the next topic is going to be the tariff, is going to be the rate. As we all know, all the capex, the investments made in renewable energy are in foreign currency, euro dollars. However, the electricity purchase, the regular consumers are familiar with, is in Turkish liras. So there is a mismatch normally that the cost is in foreign currency. However, the income can be in Turkish lira. This is another risk that should be elaborated and solved in a regular PPA. One way or another, that PPA needs to have an angle of somehow not directly in foreign currency. So that means fixed rate electricity pricing is not very possible for PPAs in renewable energy. So mostly it's going to be a floating rate, can be a market price minus a discount. But that equation somehow needs to have a foreign exchange adjustment indexation. So the third important point for a distributed generation PPA should be the term of the contract. I will address that in particular in the second part of your question, most probably. But the term should be matching with the financial obligations of such power plants. I mean the loan in this case, in this particular case. So
you're cutting out, Mr. Mustafaoğlu. We don't really hear you.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah. If you can repeat the last 10 seconds and try to
Sure.
wrap up
So
this part, that would be great.
The term of the contract is important. It should be matching with the loan terms. However, the off-takers are not very much willing to take that risk because technology is developing so fast. It's getting cheaper. And also, you would never know in the long term what your costs should be. So mostly, there is a mismatch between the expectations. But when it comes to your the core of your question, the off-taker purchaser credibility risk and how to mitigate that. So force majeures, terminations, off-taker payment supports are very critical terms to be addressed in a PPA. And if I say in a one word or in one sentences, what would be the potential answer to that is an insurance system. So insurance system, which would be insuring the credit risk here. Like there are applications like credit guarantee funds that Turkey applies for a variety of KGF loans in Turkey, or COFACE type of credit insurance mechanisms can solve the credibility, the payment risks of the off-takers of the purchaser. This seems like the direct answer, which needs to be detailed, which needs to be discussed more. But this should be the answer to that question, most probably.
Great. I took note of these. I'll come back to them when I summarize the panel. This was a mini lecture on PPA, so that was very helpful. Thank you. Now, maybe now that we understand the financing side, maybe let's go back to where we stand with respect to the policy side, and I'll try to ask that to Mr. Korkmaz, Mr. Utku Korkmaz from Solar Çatı. And so the question goes around the how could these business models, technologies, and regulatory factors can help to mitigate the challenges which we are facing in Turkey, or maybe not, on unlicensed solar PV projects. And we need to consider, of course, the net metering scheme, which is in place for this for the more than a year or so. In particular, what we've experienced also during the COVID period. So, Mr. Korkmaz, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, and sorry for a little bit delay.
No problem.
Within next year, May, we had a new regulation which allows us for net metering, monthly net metering. Previously, the scheme was only hourly net metering or instant net metering, let's say. So previously we were able to generate electricity if we are only consuming it. and the rest will be the economic value of the rest will be zero. But starting from previous year May, we have monthly net metering, and it allows us to install more power. A specific example from one business case which we are managing right now. The installed power that we designed previously according to the consumption was allowing us to install around 300 kilowatt rooftop system. It is instant net metering. It was instant net metering. But after monthly net metering, right now it allows us to the economic numbers. I mean, the economic numbers allows us to increase the number of kilowatt peak that we will be installing. And right now it is 3 times higher, and it will be around 900 kilowatt. So monthly net metering brings us the availability of installing more power, more solar and wind power. And right now there's a new legislation draft, and there's a new scheme. It's really exciting. I don't know the practices exactly, but at least the draft previously we need to be in the same connection and the generation and consumption needs to be in the same connection point. So it allows us to generate where we consume. But right now with the new legislation, it will allow us different opportunities. So we will be able to generate electricity. Maybe it is still draft regulation. We will be able to generate electricity with another or connected to another connection point. So, for example, we will be consuming electricity in Istanbul, or we will be generating it maybe somewhere else. So it will allow. Right now, it is the legislation name itself is roof legislation. So maybe it will allow us to install more and more power. So monthly net metering brings us to install more power, more installed power, and this new scheme will allow us more and more, because each single consuming point does not have enough roof space for an adequate or for enough generation, and it will also a little bit accelerate the battery system installation, because the new legislation also includes a minimum battery installation with this new scheme.
Okay, this was two major points you raised. I'll come back to the innovation side in a bit, but before that, I want to turn to Mr. Daldal to ask him about the prosumer concept. Okay, now we solved the financing part. We are hearing that the policy is going to take us further with respect to distributed generation. But now we have a new concept in terms of prosumers, and also new actors coming to the power system and gaining responsibilities. Obviously, this brings benefits to these new actors and to the system, but also it creates some challenges. And my question goes around actually the opportunities and challenges for these new actors, and please define them for Turkey if to the extent possible. And please try to elaborate for our audience the opportunity and challenges for these new stakeholders, and especially the DSOs, of course.
First of all, I would like to present also my gratitude to event organization, and I'm very pleased to be among these distinguished energy professionals. Returning back to the question, I will try not to overlap with other panelists, and I try to look from the angle of DSOs, basically, because I have also a quite deep experience on utility sector before energy. So I was also working in a utility in a DSO, and this was a very, very both exciting and on the other hand frightening subject for us, the penetration of DG, the prosumer concept, and so on. So before sharing my thoughts, I think we need a balance between resource and system-based objectives regarding planning renewable capacity. Also, one of the Shura's report, it was emphasized very successfully. I also really had insights from this report regarding this issue. I mean, our current methodology to increase renewable capacity is based on mostly resource objective. In tenders, in regulatory framework, we don't motivate the stakeholders, basically the investors, to the grid, consideration aspects. When they develop a project, they don't focus on the grid situation because the system does not motivate them to do so. So I think this is very important. In our regulatory framework, we should create a balance between grid situation and the resource capability in terms of solar, wind, any type of renewable, especially in the distributed form. And when we talk about the grid situation, we mostly focus on transmission side, but in Turkey case, we know the capacity will grow in a distributed form, and these plants will be connected to the distribution grid mostly. So we should focus on to distribution grid situation, constraints, capabilities, and the operational capabilities also of the DSOs. So in brief, major effects on the DSO side will require the preparation of infrastructure for secure connection to the grid. This is a must. You have to provide a secure connection to the grid and sustaining system balance during the operation, because it's a very crucial disturbance to the balance of the system. And also reliable protection coordination, because when you have these thousands of injection points which are connected to the grid, they both consume and produce, at the same time. And during the day, especially the loading and production scheme is changing drastically. This changes everything. The very spirit of the game, it changes at the first place. So we should focus on these three main issues, I believe. And also when we look to general projection, what's going on in Turkish PV market, there are at the moment in middle term 2 capacity creating mechanism we have. One is this national solar tender, which so-called in the sector mini YEKA. It's also in the form of distributed generation. The packages that will be developed regarding this tender will be in the form of 10 to 20 megawatts installed capacity packages. So this will also connect to the grid. And on the other hand, of course, the other panelists also mentioned, we have this very famous self-consumption rooftop legislation. And again, when we consider, when we look the average capacities which are developed under this legislation, they accumulate in between 200 kilowatts to 10 megawatts, basically inside. So in Turkey, the general capacity creation will be in the distributed form regarding renewable energy. And On the other hand, distribution companies, they, in last 5 years especially, had already invested a lot on smart grid side, on network side to, you know, integrate this also renewable capacity, those prosumers to the system at the same time. But it's not enough. I mean, especially on smart grid side, I think it might be a major constraint for the integration of prosumers, secure integration of their operation to the grid, and to create, you know, extra value chain for them in the near future when the market is ready. This integration of operational technologies might be a major concern. And between, as far as I know, between 2021 and 25, within the next 5 years, DSOs will invest almost $10 billion to their grid, and more or less approximately $1 billion of it will be related to the smart grid. So these numbers are really serious. If the investments can be planned cleverly and in a strategic manner, it's possible to answer the need. I mean, it's not like at the end a frightening subject, and I think we are a very responsive country. We have this experience, and we have this engineering excellence inside the country. I think it can be a constraint, but it will not, you know, block, of course, the penetration of the distributed generation, especially in solar. And of course, there are also options for both sides. When we consider the feasibilities of the, for example, PV projects, the financial feasibilities mostly focus on, I mean, by the way, I'm talking about this self-consumption legislation. They focus basically the capability of the plant to answer the self-consumption. But in near future, we know flexibility management will be a major market, especially DSOs or aggregators will join to the game, and there will be new revenue stream options for those prosumers. So this is an opportunity for both sides, both for aggregators, for plant owners, for investors, for everybody. So this is very exciting. And now at the moment, of course, it's the capacity is built basically on B2B side, on corporate side. I mean, industrial factories, commercial buildings. But in future, of course, when the cost also structure changed, we expect that. And with the penetration of e-mobility, electrical vehicle storage, the residential side will join to the game as well. And this flexibility management market will be very, very exciting for all the, you know, stakeholders. This is also an issue. And from again DSO parts, while finishing the first round, the investment deferral is also an opportunity for DSOs. When you have a strategic plan and when you connect and integrate securely this, you know, renewable capacity to the system, you might defer your network investments because they might also use as a capacity, they can be used as a capacity to electrify the part of the system. It's possible. So also this investment deferral for distribution companies is, I think, a very critical point to mention. So for the first round, I don't want to spend more time. I think it's okay.
Thank you.
Leaving to you there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this was very helpful because it links to my next question, which I would like to turn to Mr. Turhan. And there is, of course, when we talk about the generation, then suddenly several enabling technologies come into play, or ways of doing business, including storage, microgrids, blockchain models. So my question goes around how can we design or develop effective distributed generation models where such enabling technologies can work in hand, so we can have more benefits to the system, to the stakeholders, and we can also create flexibility to the system. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, first, I'd like to thank to EEL Events for their kind invitation, and then thank to for your moderation and for your introduction. You know, previously it was much more simple to design an electricity grid. There were only big baseload power plants whose energy carried through high voltage transmission lines. Then this high voltage is just simply stepped down to mid and low voltage levels. There were consumers only in high and low voltage levels, this simple. However, today, we live in the era of an energy revolution, I call it. Of course, the generation and distribution of electricity is affected highly from it. Distributed generation is one of the key aspects of this revolution. Why it is the key? Because it provides efficiency. If you produce where you consume and eliminate as many intermediaries as possible, both in the transmission and in the trade of the electricity, then you get efficiency. Costs go down. Efficiency that is badly needed by our Mother Earth, as the resources are being depleted in the speed of light, while polluting the environment and changing the climate, unfortunately. That is why we need efficiency and hence distributed generation. It's also economically viable, but why and how it could be possible today? I always think that we should first understand that innovation, the answer of innovation just lies there. First of all, with the dramatic decrease in the technology costs, small-scale power plants that can be built in any place, like your roof, became feasible. Solar power plant costs decreased to 1/10 of what it was 10 years ago. And also battery prices decreased to 1/6 to what it was 10 years ago. But there was not only this decrease in the electricity generation and storage equipment, but there were also the increase in the capacity of our computers, computing capacity, so that we could gather and process much more data to control all these distributed systems. There are now renewable power plants in all levels of voltage, high, mid, low voltage levels. At the same time, electrical vehicles are coming to the scene increasingly. And also there are prosumers, like consumers who at the same time produce their electricity, consume it partly and give the access to the grid. Also, a decreasing cost of electric storage brings the opportunity to integrate storage solutions to stabilize the system. Therefore, both on the generation side and consumption side, there is much more rapid changing demand and production. But there are also many versatile tools to stabilize it. The control of such a grid is much more complex compared to the grid of the previous generation, but it's efficient but complex. But that complexity is not a problem. Now we have powerful computers that can perform machine learning, or even that can perform more with artificial intelligence. So with this, in the light of these information, this bigger picture, if I come to your question, I will give very simple answer to that, because we can speak hours or we can design years about it. But I think there is one simple solution in the root that we should, in the solution, we should take into account all those aspects of flexibility of distribution generation simultaneously, and we should solve the problems just making them smaller pieces. I call it divide and conquer method. You know, we should just each unit should solve its problems inside and should communicate with other smaller units with some rules. So today people realize this should be the case, and hence there are now microgrids designed where they produce and consume and trade electricity in conjunction with heating systems, EV charging stations, active consumers, and mostly on the production side, solar power plants, great in numbers, but small in size of each. So, as I said, the root is the divide and conquer. We should solve the problems inside smaller pieces than just like Lego pieces, bring a bigger picture. About Turkey, on this side, what did we do? Starting at the end of the 2016, in fact, we just revert from this path a little bit, that even in the renewable energy power plants, we just go to very big power plant solutions, you know, the YEKA model of 1,000 megawatts. But now, in recent years, starting with 2019, we started to again come to the path of smaller solutions, smaller pieces, like Mustafa Bey mentioned, the mini YEKA tenders, and also last year, like Utku Bey mentioned, the rooftop net metering, especially net metering scheme came into place. So in Turkey, we also started to employ this method. So how we will do it, I say we will divide and conquer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess that goes along for every complex problem, to make it into small pieces and try to solve like that. So that was very helpful. And I want to now continue the last 10 minutes of our panel, more on the problem side. So far we talked about all the good things and opportunities, but now I would like to start with the policy angle again, with Mr. Korkmaz, and I want to learn whether there are actually challenges or limitations in the way the net metering is implemented, and are there solutions that you see we can take on to improve the current scheme? So I'll be very interested to hear about that.
Thanks again. Right now, the process of the unlicensed or self-consumption project is a little bit longer than expected, or it's written in the legislation. The practice is a little bit different than what it is written in the legislation, and the major problem why it is different is it is subjected to the personal commentation in some governmental bodies. There are two major problems right now or three major problems in the process. Before coming to three major problems, there is one fundamental problem, which helps the decision makers while they are thinking how to make legislation. The infrastructure. It is the infrastructure, especially the infrastructure of distribution companies, because the self-consumption is based on net metering, instant net metering, monthly net metering, yearly net metering in some countries. So there should be an infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, which helps easy execution on site. So while legislation makers writing these legislation, they think what can be executed. They don't think what is the ideal. They think what can be executed according to the current infrastructure. So in some cases, we don't apply the most ideal case. We apply the most ideal case, which is allowing due to the distribution system or distribution net metering system. This is the fundamental problem. And coming back to the executional problems on site on self-consumption project one, this we all apply call letter stuff, which is grid permit actually. So once we apply, it takes around still 2.5 months to be able to learn if we are able to connect that specific point, about 10 kilowatt projects. So it's a little bit quite long, 2.5 months. So it can be a little bit less. And the second major problem is the municipalities. for the net metering projects, for self-consumption projects, we ask municipality approval or municipality, let's say, stamp. So when we ask municipalities their approval, this is all subjected to personal commentation. So there's not a really solid, let's say, definition over there. So I guess there are 1,400 different municipalities all around Turkey. So we can face with tens or hundreds of different interpretations in those municipalities. This is the first, the second major problem, and the third is the fire department approval. Again, it is part of the process. It is part of the self-consumption project process, and it is actually it has the same problem, personal interpretation problem. First of all, there's not a solid fire protection legislation which is for solar power plants over there. And once there is a solar rooftop which is asked to fire department, most of the time they start to think from the scratch. So we need solid definition and solid legislation which does not differ person to person.
Thank you.
So after creating a solid infrastructure, if we solve those three problems, we will nearly shorten the period to the half.
Very helpful.
Thank you very much.
I took note of all these. I'll come back to them at the very end. So we have 3 more minutes, but we can probably extend for another few more, because Mr. Mustafaoğlu has mentioned the components of how to design a PPA. Now, my question is about whether there are actually legislation-related issues to implementation of PPAs, and if there are, what are the solutions? What would be needed to overcome them? A brief answer would be much appreciated.
Of course. We will, for the sake of time efficiency, I will try to wrap up very quickly. So actually, the basic answer for a question asking that if the current legislation supports this current PPA schemes, the answer is no. There are obstacles in the legislation, and this, I'm not talking about energy legislation here. There are multiple legislations which restricts certain parts of a long-term PPA, unfortunately. So the solution that I will be proposing at the end actually is coming from this different angle, this complex angle. So the first is, for example, the long-term PPAs we are talking about, and also as I mentioned in the first part of my discussion, that PPA terms should somehow match with the financing terms, which is normally more than 5 years, around 10 or 10 plus years. However, based on our competition law, contracts which are longer than 5 years is debatable. The validity of such contracts are debatable. So any PPA which is longer than 5 years is jeopardized. The validity is jeopardized. So competition law is the first obstacle in front of a long-term bankable PPA. The second is the energy law itself. The Article 24 for the unlicensed projects restricts the trading electricity from the unlicensed projects. So the owner of the power plant for the distributed generation unlicensed power plants should be the same person whoever is consuming, or same entity whoever is consuming the electricity. There are some innovative solutions that we see in the market which are very preliminary, like a leasing model, where the parties are trying to link the leasing payments to somehow the energy consumption, which have legal issues in that angle. So energy law restricts the trading electricity from unlicensed projects for distributed. And the third thing is the ownership issues of land and rooftops. So, and in case of a default of the off-taker or the purchaser, the access to such site is very debatable. So you cannot easily access the site to even get your equipment back. So from that perspective, as all these crucial problems suggest, that this is a multidisciplinary issue that we are facing in a distributed generation PPA. So the solution should also be a multidisciplinary in that perspective. So I personally think that I also investigated many other legislations all around the world. The very optimal, as Utku Bey mentioned, there is no the ideal solution. The solution should be optimal in that case, as the multi-disciplines like different legislations should get involved in that. So there must be a separate and focused PPA legislation which embraces all types of power plants, regardless if it's licensed or unlicensed. So in that particular solution, we can actually elaborate more on what needs to be fine-tuned for licensed project, what can be fine-tuned for unlicensed projects. But every single legislation, every single stakeholder takes that issue from their own perspective, and they unfortunately fall apart, fall far away from the actual to create a solution for the actual problem. So, as a last point, I would like to say that to be able to have a long-term bankable PPA, which clears the concerns of the off-taker, the purchaser, the concerns of the lenders, and concerns of the producers, can be sold within a package which focuses in particular the PPAs.
Okay, very helpful, and I think it was very conclusive. So thank you. And I'll go with the same order. So I'll turn to Mr. Daldal, and I think this prosumer DSO relationship is interesting to understand better, because there will be more prosumers, and the question is whether that relationship or growing relationship with DSOs will actually enable more deployment of distributed generation, but also ways to make that happen, like aggregators and so on. So if you can comment on that, that would be my last question on this topic for you. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to, thank you there. I will try to wrap up quickly as well to use time efficiently. And I believe at the first phase, I, gave a general picture regarding the prosumer concept, how we can integrate it to the, system. And in the second phase, I think Utku really mentioned the practical constraints in, regarding the execution, and Mr. Mustafa also mentioned the general regulatory and, other financial, legal constraints. I also believe that we should liberalize the sector as much as possible, especially the penetration of DG needs a more liberal market, liberal regulatory framework, and as bureaucracy as simple as possible. And I believe to a point, the best thing to prepare DSOs, for example, to this new paradigm, letting them to become prosumers themselves and experience this at the first hand. Unfortunately, current legislations, for example, does not let DSOs to develop their own renewable projects. So we need, such liberalized actions considering the regulatory framework. The other cases already panelists mentioned, when you have more legislation, more regulation regarding the market, it becomes at the end a constraint and creates unnecessary bureaucracy. So to sum up, prosumer concept basically becomes meaningful when we are able to utilize their capacity to maximum, such as investment deferral, peak shaving, enhancing continuity of supply, even for flexibility management. Here, the key parameter, I think, we should prepare necessary conditions with convenient regulatory framework plus financial environment. When I'm saying, financial environment, I include both competitive, competition law, mechanisms, like new innovative funds for these kind of projects and so on. And I believe Turkish markets and investors are very dynamic and responsive. When they feel secure at a reasonable level, they don't hesitate to act. So we shall feed their motivation with the correct regulation and financial environment. And then the rest will continue. The rest will find its own, path, I think. And to sum up, as Enerjisa, we are planning to be very active on the field as customer solutions company under the roof of Enerjisa Energy. And we consolidate our solutions also, under the roof of business, energy of my business. And personally, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I believe she will, I suspect in a few years she will ask those very challenging questions about nature and how we treat it. And renewable energy is one of the key parameters, and distributed generation form is an enabler to increase this capacity. So we share this, responsibility and motivation to do what is necessary to be done. So that's all from my side as well. Thank you again for your motivation and to other panelists.
Thank you. So the two pillars are the market design and financing. And I think there's one more pillar, that is digitalization. And I want to ask Mr. Turhan about the role he sees for digitalization to enable the deployment of more distributed generation.
Yes, as I mentioned, because we use the power of digitalization, now we can store and process huge amounts of data in comparably very short times with the help of computers. Therefore, what I think is digitalization will not play a role. It is the heart of the distributed generation. Without it, nothing could be possible. So it is the heart of the new grid management. It is needed first technically, to stabilize the system according to the need of the many consumers in the microgrid, from households to industrial complexes, from EV charging stations to heating units, and according to the changing production scheme of the power plants. Like if they produce more than needed, then store it in the batteries, and if it is less than, use the stored energy or draw it from the grid, etc. Very sudden decisions should be made, and changes should be done. So that can only be with the help of this digitalization. And it is not only needed for the technical side to manage the grid, but also for the trade of this electricity, because now everybody produces, everybody sells electricity, everybody buys electricity. Sellers are at the same time buyers. So, we also need digitalization in the trade side. Since everything happens at the speed of the electrons, only computers can handle such a complex and fast transaction structure. This is where blockchain come into the scene, and more blockchain structures are being integrated every day to the smart grid. It's one of the main parts of the digitalization of the distributed generation. So in order to implement all these, again, all this distributed generation model, what should we do on the regulation side in Turkey? I would like to also mention that, like all the other speakers before me mentioned, we should have our regulations as flexible and as short as possible, because with such a breathtaking speed in advancing technology, it is impossible for the regulations to catch up. Regulations should only put the rules, for this reason, should only put the rules for grid requirements technically, and it is universal in fact. And then just put the rules and fines. If you violate those rules, what will happen? And the rest should be left to the free market mechanisms, to the technology, I believe. So unfortunately, till now, our regulations are so lengthy. And even if you write something in the regulation, there are more camps on the field. Like Utku Bey mentioned, it is very difficult to fill all the requirements. So if we make the regulations as short as possible, then we will be adapt to that digitalization, and this should be the roadmap of the regulations. Again, one very simple and main thing, shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you. This was a great panel. What I learned from this, my takes are, the net metering is effective, it's working well, but on the permission side for grid, for the municipality approvals, and also on the fire protection issues, we need more effort and improvements. The PPA is an important model, but we need to have a PPA only focused legislation that looks into the take and pay, or considers take and pay. Tariff rate issues are addressed, and the term of contracts are important. Insurance system as well. Grid management is crucial, and grid planning is crucial. There's obviously and clearly planned investments. About 10% of all investments that are planned are to be for smart grids. So that's good, but more efforts are needed on grid planning, also from the market side, and that is notably important for market design. And of course, the retail level. And finally, we mentioned the role of digitalization, data management, communication protocols for managing all this data, all the prosumers, producers, consumers, to make all of this more efficient and more economically viable. Thank you to all the speakers. I hope I did not miss any important point, and thank you once more to the organizers, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.